Humanity had finally reached the stars. After decades of watching the skies and imagining life beyond Earth, the moment had come when humans no longer looked at the stars with wonder, they looked at them with purpose. The first contact wasn't loud or dramatic like the stories in old movies. There were no alien invasions, no sudden attacks. It was quiet. A faint signal was picked up by Earth's deep space listening arrays, a series of patterns so precise that no natural phenomenon could have produced them. The world's top scientists studied the signal for weeks, tracing its origin to a distant star system far beyond the reach of ordinary human travel. The beings who sent it were unlike anything humanity had imagined. Their forms were strange and fluid, shifting shapes that glimmered like sunlight through water. Their technology was far beyond human comprehension, moving through space without engines as humans understood them, and communicating in a language built on vibrations and light patterns rather than words. When humanity finally responded, it was cautiously. Messages were sent back in codes, pictures, and simple symbols that the aliens could understand. There was a nervous excitement among people on Earth. For centuries, humanity had wondered if they were alone, and now they were proving they were not. The first meeting, in a specially constructed space station orbiting a neutral star, was unlike anything humanity had prepared for. Scientists, diplomats, and observers from many nations watched as the alien forms drifted through the station's corridors. They did not walk. They flowed, moving with a grace that made the human visitors feel awkward and stiff in comparison. When the first words or their closest approximation were exchanged, there was laughter and confusion. Humanity realized quickly that while the aliens were intelligent, their way of thinking was completely alien. Their priorities, their sense of time, even their sense of emotion, did not match anything humans had experienced. It became clear that humanity had stumbled into a vast galactic network of civilizations, each with their own rules, alliances, and histories. The aliens explained, as best as communication allowed, that their galaxy had long been shaped by power and dominance. Civilizations expanded aggressively, consuming resources and territories without pause. Alliances were fragile, and wars could erupt suddenly. Humanity, with its small but growing fleet and cautious diplomacy, was a newcomer that many saw as weak but curious. The first contact was not without tension. One race, known to the galaxy as a fierce and expanding empire, had arrived near human-controlled space, seeking to establish a foothold. They were survivors of a failed conflict elsewhere, and they believed that humans could be either allies or obstacles. They sent emissaries to speak with the humans, but their intentions were unclear. Unlike the flowing aliens, these beings were rigid and angular, with faces that seemed carved from metal. Their movements were precise, and their words, when translated, carried a subtle threat. Human leaders and scientists faced a dilemma they had never imagined. On one hand, humanity had the ability to warn nearby civilizations about this aggressive race, to prevent potential attacks and destruction. On the other hand, humanity was still young among the stars. Their technology, while impressive, was fragile compared to the giants of the galaxy. Any action taken could spark a war that humans were not ready to fight. The choice was terrifying. Speak and risk drawing attention, or remain silent and watch from the shadows. As discussions continued in quiet rooms filled with screens and data, a consensus began to form. Humanity would choose observation over intervention. It was not a decision made lightly. Leaders understood that this meant watching potential suffering without acting. It went against the instincts of empathy that humans prized. Yet the reality of their situation was undeniable. Survival often demanded difficult choices, and in this moment, silence was the safest path. Despite this choice, humanity did not act with cruelty. The observation stations were filled with scientists eager to understand, to learn, to map the movements of the galaxy's players. Every action taken was calculated. Every signal sent or withheld was deliberate. Humanity had learned through centuries of conflict on its own planet that power without foresight was dangerous. To survive among the stars, they would need more than weapons. They would need patience, strategy, and restraint. The first weeks of observation were tense. The humans watched as the aggressive race tested nearby systems, taking what they could and challenging smaller civilizations. Other species sent messages begging for help. The humans received these messages with a heavy sense of responsibility. Each plea tugged at something deep within them, a desire to act, to intervene, to prevent suffering. But they remained silent, carefully recording every movement, analyzing every decision, and waiting for the right moment, though no one yet knew if that moment would ever come. What surprised the humans most was how quickly the galaxy began to notice their silence. Other civilizations had expected humans to be reactive, to step forward, to assert moral authority. Instead, humans were quiet. They studied, they calculated, they held their tongue. This quietude created a sense of unease. Stories began to spread tales of a species that watched suffering without interference, that chose restraint even when it could act. It was not evil, and it was not cowardice. It was something else entirely, something the galaxy had never seen before. Calculated patience. Even the humans themselves struggled with the weight of their decision. Meetings in the observation stations were filled with debate and doubt. Some argued that humanity had failed its moral duty, that their silence was a betrayal of the principles that had guided them for centuries. Others reminded them that survival required wisdom as much as courage. To act without understanding could lead to catastrophe not only for humanity, but for countless other civilizations. The debate was heated, passionate, and sometimes silent, as individuals wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. And so, humanity continued to watch. Each day, the stars revealed more secrets, more civilizations, more conflicts. Humans observed the strategies of empires, the weaknesses of conquerors, and the resilience of the oppressed. Every piece of knowledge became a tool, every decision weighed against its potential consequences. Humanity's silence was not empty. It was deliberate, heavy with intent, and quietly powerful. In the end, the first contact had not resulted in immediate friendship or open conflict. It resulted in something subtler, something more profound. The galaxy had noticed a new player, humans, whose actions, or lack thereof, were unpredictable. Other species began to whisper of humans who could choose silence over mercy, calculation over instinct, and patience over immediate action. It was a kind of power that no weapon could match. And though humans did not yet fully understand it themselves, this power would shape the galaxy in ways no one could predict. As the first part of humanity's journey among the stars came to a close, there was a quiet understanding among those who watched and waited. Humanity had stepped into the galaxy not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as observers. Their presence alone began to shift the balance of power. Their choice to remain silent, to restrain themselves, even when faced with suffering, was the beginning of a story that would echo across light-years. In the quiet corridors of observation stations. Humans continued to study, to record, to wait. Outside, the stars shimmered with the movements of countless civilizations, each unaware that one new species had arrived, a species whose decisions would be remembered not for their battles, but for their deliberate and unsettling silence. And so, humanity's journey had begun not with fire and fury, but with quiet watchfulness. The galaxy was changing, and humanity, for the first time, understood that sometimes the greatest power came not from action, but from the choice to remain still. The weeks following the first contact were filled with tension, anticipation, and a quiet, unspoken fear. Humanity had made its choice, to observe and remain silent. But as days turned into weeks, the consequences of that decision became clearer. The distant civilizations began to test the humans, sending messages, probes, and emissaries to see whether they would act. Would they intervene to protect the weak, or would they truly remain silent, as their actions so far suggested? The humans watched everything carefully. Every movement of ships, every signal, every tiny shift in communication patterns was recorded and analyzed. Scientists and strategists worked together, their efforts combining knowledge with caution. Unlike humans on Earth, who had grown accustomed to immediate responses and quick decisions, these humans learned patience. Decisions were made slowly, deliberately, with attention to detail. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and even the smallest mistake could lead to disaster. One of the first real tests of humanity's decision came when an alien civilization, small and unarmed, fell under attack from a powerful neighboring empire. Their distress signals were desperate, pleading for help. Every human observer felt the weight of responsibility. Some in the council argued that this was the moment to intervene, to show mercy and assert moral authority. Others reminded them of the risk. Humanity's technology was advanced, yes, but their fleets were small. Any engagement could trigger a conflict that humans were not ready for. The debate was long and exhausting, filled with frustration and doubt. In the end, humanity chose silence once more. Instead of sending fleets to intervene, they recorded every detail, mapping the attack, noting every strategy the aggressors used, and tracking the movements of the victims as they tried to survive. This choice was not easy. Many of those observing were troubled by the suffering they could see, and some questioned whether humanity was becoming cold, detached, or even cruel. But they reminded themselves that their silence was not indifference. It was a tool, a calculated form of power that the galaxy had never seen before. As the humans continued their careful observation, they noticed something unexpected. The aggressive empires began to hesitate. They noticed the humans, and while they did not yet understand the true extent of their capabilities, the humans' inaction alone created uncertainty. Could humanity intervene at any moment? Would they strike back if pushed too far? The mere presence of humans, combined with their choice not to act, began to shift the balance of power. At the same time, humans began to understand the complexity of galactic politics. Alliances were fragile, betrayals were frequent, and civilizations often acted based on fear as much as reason. Every decision, every signal, every message could trigger reactions that humans could barely predict. By remaining silent, humanity gained a powerful advantage: knowledge. They could study the galaxy without revealing their hand. They could understand motivations, weaknesses, and strategies before making a move. Silence, it seemed, was more powerful than any fleet or weapon. Humanity also learned about the lives of the beings they observed. These civilizations were not just armies and technologies. They were families, communities, and individuals trying to survive. Humans saw alien parents comforting frightened children, workers struggling to rebuild after attacks, and leaders facing impossible choices. Despite the distance and differences, humanity felt a connection. Their silence weighed heavily because they understood the suffering they could alleviate if they chose to act. It was a difficult balance: empathy versus survival, morality versus strategy. One of the most challenging moments came when an alien colony, caught between two warring empires, sent a message directly to the humans. They begged for intervention, warning that their species could be wiped out entirely. The humans studied the message for days, analyzing every word, every signal, and every hidden meaning. The debate among the council was intense. Some argued that allowing the colony to perish would stain humanity's conscience forever. Others reminded them that intervening could escalate the war, endanger human lives, and set a precedent that would make humanity a target. Ultimately, humanity maintained their silence. Instead of intervening, they shared information with the colony about safe routes, evacuation plans, and resource management. It was indirect help, guidance rather than force. Some within the colony survived, while others did not. Humanity's choice to offer guidance without direct interference became a pattern. They acted only when absolutely safe, using intelligence and strategy rather than brute force. During this period, humans began to understand the galaxy's perception of them. They were seen as unpredictable, even unsettling. Civilizations that had once dismissed humanity as weak or inexperienced began to treat them with caution. The silence that humans maintained was not ignorance. It was deliberate, measured, and observant. Stories of humanity's restraint spread slowly, creating a reputation that blended fear and respect. Humans realized that power did not always come from weapons or numbers. Sometimes it came from the ability to choose when to act and when not to. Even among humans, this approach caused friction. There were heated arguments about morality and duty. Some felt that humanity was losing its soul, that choosing observation over mercy was a betrayal of everything that had made humans compassionate and humane. Others argued that survival required wisdom and patience. That morality was not just about immediate action, but about long-term preservation. These debates were never fully resolved, and perhaps that was the point. Humanity had learned that some questions had no simple answers, and that living in the galaxy required accepting ambiguity and complexity. The humans' observation stations became centers of learning and strategy. Teams worked around the clock, analyzing battles, mapping trade routes, and recording social patterns of alien civilizations. Every piece of data collected was a tool. Every pattern recognized a potential advantage. Humans were silent, yes, but they were far from inactive. They were building knowledge, understanding the flow of power, and preparing for a future that could not yet be predicted. As time passed, humanity's reputation in the galaxy grew. Other civilizations whispered about the humans who chose silence over mercy, who watched suffering without immediate action, and who could appear at any moment with overwhelming force. The humans' restraint created a tension that others could not ignore. Civilizations that had once acted boldly now hesitated. Aggressors thought twice before attacking, knowing that humans could intervene, or perhaps remain silent, but in ways that were always effective. Despite the growing influence, humans remained focused on observation. They learned patience, understanding that impulsive actions could destroy everything they had worked to protect. They learned to see beyond immediate events, recognizing the ripple effects that every decision could have across light years. And in doing so, humanity became something more than a rising power. They became a presence that could shape the galaxy not through action, but through the quiet, deliberate force of their will. The tension of observation was never easy. Humans watched entire civilizations struggle, sometimes fall, and sometimes survive against impossible odds. They felt the pain of those they could not save, and the satisfaction of those who survived through guidance alone. Each day brought new challenges, new calculations, and new moral dilemmas. And yet, humanity remained resolute. They understood that their silence was not cowardice, nor was it cruelty. It was a strategy, a way to ensure survival, knowledge, and eventual strength in a galaxy that demanded both wisdom and caution. By the end of this period, humanity had changed. They were no longer just explorers or diplomats. They were observers and strategists, cautious but powerful, patient but decisive. They had learned that silence could speak louder than words, that restraint could be more influential than aggression, and that sometimes the best way to protect life was not by rushing to save it, but by understanding it first. Humanity had entered the galaxy not as conquerors, but as silent watchers. And the galaxy, slowly but surely, was beginning to take notice. The beings who had once dismissed humans as inexperienced or weak now understood that humans could be dangerous in a way no one expected. They could wield silence as a weapon, patience as a shield, and knowledge as a power far greater than any fleet or weapon. And so, humanity continued. They observed, they calculated, and they waited. Their silence was heavy with intent, and every day, the galaxy learned a little more about the quiet strength of a species that chose strategy over immediate action, knowledge over impulse, and silence over mercy. Time passed, and humanity's silent observation began to take on a life of its own. The galaxy was changing, slowly but undeniably, and humans could feel it even from the quiet corridors of their observation stations. Every report, every data stream, every intercepted signal told a story of conflict, of survival, and of power struggles that had been going on for centuries. Humanity, still new among the stars, was learning that knowledge alone could shape events in ways force never could. The first major test of their restraint came when one of the most aggressive empires in the galaxy moved directly into human-monitored space. They were vast, organized, and heavily armed, their fleets spreading across multiple star systems. When their initial scans detected human observation posts, they did not immediately attack. Instead, they sent a warning, a direct message, carrying subtle threats and a demonstration of force. It was meant to intimidate, to test the humans, and perhaps to see if they could be manipulated. Humans studied the message carefully. The words and signals contained threats and warnings, yes, but also information about strategy, supply lines, and fleet movement. For some in the Council, it was tempting to respond with action, to strike first, to show strength, and to assert humanity's place among the powerful civilizations. But the decision was made to remain silent, not out of fear, but because humanity had learned that patience could be more valuable than immediate reaction. By choosing observation, they allowed the aggressive empire to reveal its strategies, weaknesses, and true intentions over time, not at the same time. Smaller civilizations began to react to humanity's presence. Some sought alliances, offering information, trade, or resources in exchange for protection or guidance. Others watched with suspicion, unsure whether humans could be trusted or whether their silence masked hidden threats. Humanity carefully navigated these interactions, offering indirect assistance, sharing knowledge that could help civilization survive without directly intervening in conflicts. The humans were learning diplomacy on a scale far beyond Earth's experience. One of the most significant moments came when an entire planetary system, inhabited by a fragile and peaceful species, became caught in a dispute between two larger empires. Messages arrived on human communication channels, pleading for help. The humans analyzed every detail, tracing fleet movements, supply shortages, and communication logs. They calculated the possible outcomes of intervention and inaction alike. They debated quietly among themselves, aware that whatever choice they made would be scrutinized, not just by those they could help, but by every civilization watching from a distance. Ultimately, humanity chose silence once again. They did not send fleets, nor did they launch attacks. Instead, they transmitted carefully coded advice-safe routes for evacuation, tips on conserving energy, and warnings about potential threats without directly stepping into the conflict. Some of the species survived, and others were lost. The humans carried the weight of these outcomes with them, understanding that every decision, even a silent one, had consequences. But they also recognized that their careful restraint was slowly building a kind of influence that force alone could never achieve. The galaxy began to notice. Other civilizations whispered about humans who chose observation over action, who could appear at any moment with overwhelming power, and who had the patience to watch for the right moment rather than rushing into battle. Stories spread of humans who would weigh every possibility before acting, who calculated the long-term consequences of every choice. Fear and respect grew simultaneously. Humans had not fired a single shot, but their presence was already shaping the decisions of empires and leaders far older and more experienced than themselves. Within humanity's own ranks, the burden of restraint was heavy. Individuals struggled with doubt and morality. Could they really stand by while other civilizations suffered, even when they had the ability to intervene? Some argued passionately that humans were becoming too calculating, too distant, losing the empathy that had defined them for centuries. Others reminded them that empathy alone could not ensure survival in a galaxy governed by power and strategy. These discussions were often long and uncomfortable, but they were necessary. Humanity was learning to balance compassion with wisdom, morality with pragmatism. Meanwhile, the aggressive empire continued to probe human-monitored space. They tested boundaries, launched surveillance missions, and sent scouts to observe human behavior. Every action they took was analyzed, and humans discovered patterns in their strategies. Slowly, humans began to predict their movements, to anticipate threats, and to develop strategies that did not involve immediate conflict. They realized that understanding an opponent fully could be more powerful than attacking them blindly. A galaxy, once so hostile and unpredictable, was beginning to reveal its logic to humanity. Even as they observed, humans continued to refine their own technologies. They developed advanced monitoring systems, faster-than-light communication, networks, and defense strategies that could protect their systems without drawing attention. Every new invention was tested carefully, ensuring that it could serve not only as a tool for survival, but also as a deterrent for potential aggressors. Humans were not just observing, they were preparing, learning how to exist in a galaxy where patience could be as powerful as any weapon. The human silence also created unexpected alliances. Smaller civilizations began to approach them quietly, sharing knowledge and resources in exchange for guidance. Some offered insight into ancient technologies, long-forgotten strategies, and hidden truths about the galaxy. Humans learned quickly, assimilating information and using it to strengthen their understanding of the galaxy's balance of power. Every secret uncovered, every alliance formed, added to humanity's growing influence. One particularly tense moment occurred when a fleet from the aggressive empire intercepted a convoy carrying vital supplies for a vulnerable species. The species sent an urgent plea to humanity, expecting a direct intervention. Humans calculated the risks carefully, considering the strength of the attacking fleet, the possible consequences for their own systems, and the potential long-term outcomes of action or inaction. In the end, they chose to assist indirectly, guiding the convoy through a series of safe routes that avoided direct confrontation. The supplies arrived, saving many lives without triggering a larger conflict. Through moments like these, humanity began to understand a fundamental truth about power in the galaxy. It was not measured by the number of ships or weapons, but by the ability to influence outcomes while remaining unpredictable. Silence, restraint, and patience were as powerful as fleets or empires. By choosing not to act hastily, humans could shape events, protect lives, and build influence without exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. The galaxy was learning that humans were not to be underestimated. At the same time, humans continued to wrestle with the moral implications of their choices. Observers recorded the suffering they could not prevent, feeling the weight of every loss. Debates continued late into the artificial nights, discussions filled with empathy, logic, and the struggle to reconcile morality with survival. These discussions, though difficult, were crucial. They ensured that humanity did not lose its sense of self, even as it navigated the complexities of galactic power. By the end of this period, humans had begun to change not just the galaxy, but themselves. They were no longer simply explorers or diplomats. They were strategists, observers, and cautious influencers. They had learned that patience could be a weapon, that silence could speak louder than any declaration, and that sometimes the most powerful actions were the ones not taken immediately. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy continued to grow, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and respect. The aggressive empire, frustrated by the humans' restraint, began to reconsider its strategies. Could these newcomers act decisively if threatened? Could they launch an attack that would overwhelm any opponent? The uncertainty created hesitation, and hesitation often led to mistakes. Humanity's silence, combined with their growing understanding of galactic politics, created a ripple effect that spread across star systems. Civilizations that had once dismissed humans as insignificant now watched them closely, wondering what their next move might be. And yet, humans remained focused on observation. They continued to study, to record, to learn. Every piece of information, every detail of strategy, every glimpse into alien societies was a tool for understanding. Humanity had stepped into a galaxy of chaos and uncertainty, and they had learned that sometimes the greatest strength lay not in action, but in waiting, in watching, and in knowing when to strike and when to remain silent. In the quiet corridors of observation stations, humans worked tirelessly, knowing that the galaxy's eyes were upon them. They had chosen patience over impulse, restraint over immediate reaction, and knowledge over power. And in doing so, they had begun to shape the galaxy in a way that no one had expected. Their silence had become a language, a signal that humans were not ordinary, not predictable, and not to be underestimated. By the end of this chapter, humanity understood that the galaxy was not a place of simple rules. It was a complex web of alliances, conflicts, and motivations. And in this web, humans had discovered a unique power, the power to win. Humanity's presence in the galaxy had started to ripple outward in ways no one had fully predicted. What began as cautious observation had become a subtle, almost invisible influence that other civilizations could feel. The silence humans chose was no longer just a method of survival. It had begun to shape decisions, policies, and even the fears of those who had once considered themselves the most powerful in the galaxy. The aggressive empires, in particular, were unsettled. They had grown used to projecting power, conquering weaker civilizations, and moving with certainty across the stars. But humans were different. The humans did not attack, they did not boast, and they did not reveal the full extent of their power. Yet their presence alone changed behavior. Entire fleets slowed their advance, commanders paused before taking risks, and ambitious leaders reconsidered plans that had seemed inevitable. Humanity's silence was creating hesitation, a weapon no empire had anticipated. Meanwhile, the humans continued to study the galaxy in painstaking detail. Observation stations collected streams of information: fleet movements, trade routes, communication networks, cultural patterns, and even the social and economic conditions of distant worlds. Every scrap of knowledge was analyzed and cross-referenced. Humans were learning not just about technology or strategy, but about psychology, motivation, and the subtle ways civilizations influenced one another. The galaxy was not just a battlefield, it was a living network of people, choices, and consequences, and humanity was beginning to understand how to navigate it. Despite this growing understanding, there were moments of moral tension. Humans saw suffering, injustice, and fear every day. They intercepted messages from civilizations under siege, heard cries for help, and witnessed populations struggling to survive against odds that seemed insurmountable. Some members of the observation teams felt a deep pull to intervene directly, to use humanity's growing power to stop the suffering immediately. But the Council reminded them of the lessons learned in earlier conflicts. Intervention could bring unintended consequences, ignite wars, and put countless lives, including human lives, at risk. Restraint, painful as it was, remained the wisest course. In one particularly intense situation, a small civilization that humans had been monitoring faced total annihilation. Its planetary system had been surrounded by a coalition of aggressive empires seeking control of nearby star lanes. Desperation filled the signals the humans intercepted. Every observer felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. Yet, after careful analysis, the humans chose indirect assistance. They provided strategies for escape, calculations for safe navigation, and insights into enemy movement patterns. Not all survived, but those who did manage to escape with their culture and knowledge intact. The humans' choice had saved lives without sparking a larger conflict. As the humans continued their work, a new pattern emerged. Silence, once seen as passive, began to command attention. Civilizations observed that humans did not act rashly, but when they did act, even indirectly, the results were precise, efficient, and often decisive. Fear and respect grew in equal measure. Some species began to approach humans quietly, seeking guidance or alliances, hoping to gain favor or at least avoid confrontation. The humans, careful not to reveal too much, shared only what was necessary, guiding others in subtle ways that strengthened relationships without compromising their strategy. At the same time, the humans began to realize the psychological power of their restraint. In the past, civilizations had been accustomed to power being demonstrated through displays of force. Ships, weapons, armies, and invasions were the language of influence. Humanity, by contrast, spoke through observation, calculation, and selective guidance. The uncertainty this created, never knowing if the humans would act, when, or how, caused hesitation among even the boldest empires. Humanity had discovered a new kind of power, one that relied not on aggression, but on patience and perception. Despite the growing influence, humans did not become complacent. Observation stations were always active, monitoring, calculating, and learning. Humans recognized that the galaxy was unpredictable and that even small mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. Training programs were rigorous, strategies constantly updated, and simulations run to prepare for every conceivable scenario. The humans understood that restraint required constant vigilance. Power earned through observation was fragile, dependent on precision, discipline, and unwavering focus. One particularly remarkable development occurred when multiple civilizations began to form an informal network of communication with humans. They shared intelligence, trade opportunities, and warnings about potential threats. Humans analyzed this network carefully, understanding not just the data being shared, but also the trust and fear that underpinned it. Through subtle coordination, they were able to help some civilizations avoid conflict while simultaneously observing and understanding the strategies of the more aggressive powers. Humanity's influence had begun to extend far beyond their immediate control, shaping decisions and outcomes across multiple star systems. The moral weight of these choices remained heavy. Humans knew that some civilizations would suffer despite their careful guidance. They also knew that by not intervening directly, they were creating a precedent. Some feared that others might see humans as cold, calculating, or even cruel. Yet, humanity's leaders reminded everyone that restraint was not cruelty, it was strategy, and that strategy was essential for survival. Every life preserved indirectly was a success, and every conflict avoided through observation strengthened humanity's position for the challenges yet to come. Over time, humanity became a kind of enigma. Other civilizations did not fully understand them. They could not predict what humans might do in a crisis, and they could not measure their full potential. This unpredictability created respect and sometimes fear. Humans were no longer simply participants in galactic events. They had become a presence whose influence shaped decisions, even without direct involvement. The galaxy had learned that a species that chose silence over mercy, patience over impulsive action, and observation over immediate intervention could wield power in a way no one had imagined. Yet, even as they grew in influence, humans remained deeply connected to the moral questions that had guided their decisions from the beginning. They debated endlessly, explored alternatives, and reviewed outcomes in painstaking detail. These discussions were not theoretical. They were lived experiences, informed by real events and real consequences. Every choice, every instance of restraint, carried weight. Humans understood that survival in the galaxy required more than technology or strength. It required wisdom, discipline, and an understanding of the consequences of every action. As the fourth part of their journey unfolded, humans had begun to shape the galaxy not through force, but through influence and subtlety. They were creating a network of knowledge, observation, and quiet guidance that would define their role among the stars for generations. Civilizations watched them, tried to anticipate their next move, and learned to respect the silent power that humans wielded. The galaxy was slowly coming to understand that silence could be more powerful than action, that patience could be more influential than aggression, and that humanity's quiet presence was changing the very nature of interstellar politics. Humanity had learned that restraint required courage. Choosing not to act, even when action seemed possible, was an extraordinary challenge. It demanded focus, discipline, and an understanding that the consequences of impulsive decisions could ripple across light years. And yet, this very restraint had become humanity's greatest strength. By observing, calculating, and guiding without direct intervention, humans had begun to reshape the galaxy in ways no one had anticipated. Even as they watched and waited, humans prepared for the future. They refined their technologies, trained their fleets, and deepened their understanding of galactic strategy. They knew that moments would come when action would be unavoidable, when their silence would need to be broken. But until that moment, they continued to observe, learn, and influence from the shadows. Every decision was weighed, every outcome analyzed, and every lesson carefully recorded. By the end of this period, humanity had established a reputation that stretched across multiple civilizations. They were no longer just newcomers. They were a force whose influence was felt even without direct engagement. Empires hesitated, smaller civilizations sought guidance, and everyone began to recognize that humans had mastered a form of power that was entirely different from anything the galaxy had known. It was the power of silence, patience, and calculated observation, and it was shaping the future in ways that even humans themselves were only beginning to understand. And so, humanity's journey continued. The galaxy had learned to pay attention to these silent watchers, who could influence events without firing a single shot. Humans had chosen silence over mercy, observation over immediate intervention, and strategy over impulse. And in doing so, they had begun to write a story that would echo across the stars, a story of a species that learned to wield patience as power and restraint as a force more formidable than any weapon. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy had grown beyond anything anyone on Earth could have imagined. The species that had once been confined to a single planet was now a quiet, formidable presence across multiple star systems. Humanity had not waged war, nor had it made grand displays of power. Instead, it had mastered something far subtler, influence through observation, patience, and careful guidance. Civilizations everywhere had begun to notice that humans acted differently, and that difference carried weight. The most powerful empires of the galaxy, those used to bending smaller civilizations to their will, began to hesitate in the presence of humans. Even small, seemingly insignificant human fleets could represent more than brute force. They represented knowledge, strategy, and unpredictability. No one knew when humans might intervene, or in what way. This uncertainty alone caused empires to pause their aggressive moves, rethink strategies, and avoid unnecessary risks. The human's restraint had become a form of power, and it was far more effective than conventional weaponry. Observation stations across human-controlled space continued to collect immense amounts of data. Humans tracked fleets, monitored communications, and analyzed economic, social, and political patterns of countless civilizations. Every detail mattered. A minor alliance between two distant planets, a sudden surge of trade, or even a subtle change in military drills could indicate shifts in power. The humans studied all of it, building a network of understanding that no empire could match. Knowledge itself had become a weapon, silent but lethal in its effectiveness. Yet, despite the growing influence, humans remained careful. They knew that any overt move could trigger chaos. The galaxy was unpredictable, and many civilizations had long memories of betrayal and aggression. To act too soon or to reveal too much could spark a war that humans were not yet ready to fight. Restraint was their shield, patience their armor, and observation their sword. Humanity's strength lay in knowing when not to act, in understanding that sometimes the greatest victories came from inaction. During this time, humans began to act as quiet mediators in several conflicts. Instead of sending fleets or weapons, they provided intelligence, calculated strategies, and guidance that allowed weaker civilizations to protect themselves. One small planet, trapped between two warring powers, was able to evacuate key populations, secure vital resources, and survive because humans shared knowledge without direct interference. These indirect actions became a hallmark of human strategy, influencing outcomes without ever stepping fully into the battle. Humans also began to understand the power of reputation. Civilizations whispered stories of the species that could observe, suffering without immediate reaction, of beings who acted only when it was necessary and calculated. Fear and respect grew side by side. Aggressive empires, unsure of human capabilities, hesitated in their campaigns. Smaller civilizations, unsure whether humans would intervene on their behalf, sought alliances quietly and cautiously. Humanity's silence had become a language, conveying warning, authority, and presence without a single shot being fired. At the same time, humanity faced moral challenges. Every conflict, they observed, brought difficult questions. Could they have saved more lives if they had acted directly? Were they responsible for those who perished under the watchful eyes of human observers? Some humans felt the weight of these decisions heavily, struggling with doubt and guilt. Council debates often lasted days, filled with arguments over morality, survival, and the long-term consequences of action versus inaction. These debates ensured that humanity remained grounded even as it gained influence across the stars. One pivotal moment occurred when a coalition of smaller civilizations, threatened by a powerful empire, sought human assistance. They were desperate, sending pleas across light years, and the humans studied every detail. The council convened to discuss intervention. Some argued for direct involvement, believing that immediate action could save countless lives. Others reminded them of the risks direct action could escalate the conflict, draw the attention of other empires, and jeopardize the delicate balance humanity had begun to establish. After careful deliberation, humans chose to provide indirect support, intelligence, strategic guidance, and safe escape routes. This allowed many to survive while avoiding a direct confrontation with the empire. The choice was difficult, but it reinforced the humans' philosophy. Power did not always come from action, but from knowing when to act and when to hold back. The galaxy began to recognize a pattern in human behavior. Humans did not act rashly, nor did they follow predictable strategies. Their interventions, when they occurred, were precise, calculated, and often decisive. Civilizations learned to watch humans carefully, to anticipate but never fully understand them. This unpredictability became a powerful advantage. Empires that once relied on fear and brute force now hesitated, uncertain how the humans would respond if provoked. The mere presence of humans reshaped military campaigns, political negotiations, and even trade relations across multiple star systems. Within human ranks, preparation continued tirelessly. Observation stations, fleets, and training programs were constantly updated. Humans ran simulations of potential conflicts, studied the strategies of distant civilizations, and refined technologies that could protect them without revealing their full capabilities. Every new insight, every piece of data collected, increased humanity's ability to act with precision. They were learning to anticipate events, influence outcomes, and survive in a galaxy where unpredictability was the only constant. Humans also began to cultivate subtle alliances. Some civilizations, impressed by the humans' restraint and intelligence, quietly shared information and resources. In return, humans offered guidance and insight without demanding allegiance. These relationships were built on mutual respect and cautious trust, not dominance or intimidation. Through these networks, humans extended their influence without ever appearing to assert it directly. They were shaping the galaxy as observers and strategists rather than conquerors. Despite the successes, humanity never lost sight of the moral consequences of its decisions. They recorded outcomes meticulously, reflecting on what worked and what did not. They analyzed the suffering they could not prevent and the lives they saved indirectly, constantly refining their approach. Humans understood that their silence was not neutrality, it was a choice, heavy with responsibility, and every choice carried consequences that rippled across light years. Over time, even the most aggressive empires began to approach humans with caution. Leaders who had once considered humans insignificant now paused before making decisions that might draw attention. The uncertainty created by human restraint became a powerful deterrent. Civilizations that had relied on immediate action and displays of force learned that a species could wield patience, observation, and indirect influence as a weapon more formidable than fleets of warships. Humanity's silent power had become a force of its own, the humans. Indirect interventions continued to save lives and shape events. They helped vulnerable civilizations develop strategies for survival, avoid unnecessary conflicts, and navigate the complexities of interstellar politics. Every action, carefully measured and executed, reinforced humanity's reputation as a force that could influence the galaxy without direct confrontation. The balance of power shifted subtly, quietly, and effectively, with humans at the center of an ever-expanding network of knowledge and influence. Even as humanity's influence grew, they remained vigilant. Observation never ceased, training never paused, data collection never stopped. Humans knew that the galaxy was unpredictable, and that even the smallest mistake could have disastrous consequences. Their restraint required discipline, courage, and foresight. It was a constant test of character and intelligence, a challenge that humanity had embraced fully. By the end of this period, humanity had become a presence unlike any other. They had not conquered through aggression, nor had they ruled through fear alone. Instead, they had mastered subtlety, patience, and influence. Their silence had become a signal, their restraint a tool, and their observation a source of power that few in the galaxy could fully comprehend. Civilizations both feared and respected them, knowing that humans could act at the right moment with devastating precision. And so, humanity's journey continued. They had learned to wield influence without confrontation, to save lives without fighting, and to reshape the galaxy without drawing attention to themselves. Their power was silent, subtle, and profound. The galaxy had begun to understand that humans were a species unlike any other one that had chosen observation over immediate action, patience over impulse, and strategic restraint over reckless. Interference. In the quiet control rooms aboard observation stations orbiting distant stars, humans continued to watch. They studied fleets, civilizations, and conflicts. They calculated, predicted, and guided. Every moment was an opportunity to learn, to influence, and to prepare for a future in which they could act decisively when the time was right. Their influence spread not through force, but through knowledge, restraint, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was patience. Humanity had become something more than a civilization. It had become a presence, a force, and a reminder. Humanity had grown in ways no one on Earth could have imagined. From a species confined to one small planet, humans had become watchers, strategists, and silent influencers across countless star systems. Their presence in the galaxy was now well established. Yet their power remained subtle, measured, and deliberate. They had learned that true strength was not always shown through force, but through patience, calculation, and the quiet ability to shape events without being noticed until the moment was right. The galaxy had begun to respect humans, and in some cases, even fear them. Empires that once acted without caution now hesitated, unsure how humans might respond if provoked. Smaller civilizations watched carefully, hoping to gain favor or at least remain in human good graces. This influence, or not from fleets or weapons, but from observation and strategic restraint, had created a new kind of balance across the stars. The human silence had become a language, a warning, a signal, and a form of power all at once. Despite this growing influence, humanity faced challenges unlike any they had encountered before. Conflicts continued, often erupting without warning. Aggressive empires tested the limits of diplomacy, probing human-monitored space with fleets and communication signals. Some civilizations sought help desperately, sending messages of fear and hope alike. Humans carefully analyzed each situation, weighing options, calculating risks, and making decisions that balanced survival, morality, and long-term strategy. Every choice carried weight, and humans understood that a single mistake could trigger consequences that rippled across light-years. In one particularly tense moment, a coalition of aggressive empires attempted to dominate a sector of space near human-monitored systems. They believed humans to be observers only, unwilling to act decisively. Yet humans had learned the power of unpredictability. While no fleet initially engaged the aggressors directly, humans shared carefully calculated intelligence with the threatened civilizations, revealing weaknesses, safe routes, and strategies to survive. Entire fleets repositioned, lives were saved, and the aggressive coalition found itself frustrated and uncertain. Humanity had acted without firing a single shot, yet the consequences were profound. This period of quiet influence taught humans that power was not always obvious. Their ability to shape outcomes through indirect action became a defining feature of their presence in the galaxy. They guided, advised, and observed, and in doing so, prevented conflicts from escalating and saved countless lives. The galaxy had begun to understand that humans were not reckless nor predictable, nor weak. They were calculating, patient, and quietly powerful. Even within humanity, the weight of these decisions was immense. Observers and strategists carried the responsibility of life and death on their shoulders. Some nights were long and silent, filled with debates over morality, ethics, and the potential consequences of every choice. The humans who worked in these stations knew that survival in the galaxy was not about fighting every battle, but about understanding the patterns, predicting outcomes, and knowing when restraint was the most powerful tool. One of the most remarkable outcomes of this period was the growing respect humans earned from other civilizations. Stories spread about a species that could choose silence over immediate intervention, patience over impulsive action, and calculation over emotion. The uncertainty this created was a powerful deterrent. Aggressive empires hesitated, smaller civilizations approached carefully, and the galaxy began to recognize that humans operated under rules no one else fully understood. Their silence was deliberate, strategic, and commanding. At the same time, humans never became complacent. Observation stations were upgraded, training programs refined, and strategies constantly updated. Humans studied new technologies, monitored alien behavior patterns, and prepared for potential threats that could emerge at any moment. The galaxy was unpredictable, and humans understood that vigilance and preparation were just as important as patience and restraint. They balanced observation with readiness, knowledge with foresight, and restraint with careful intervention. During this period, humans also began to develop more direct forms of influence, though always carefully measured. They provided guidance to civilizations in need, shared strategic intelligence, and helped threatened populations avoid destruction, all without revealing the full extent of human power. The result was a galaxy slowly aligning with human influence, where their guidance subtly shifted decisions, minimized conflict, and preserved life, all without direct engagement. Humans had become quiet architects of galactic stability. Even as humans expanded their influence, moral challenges persisted. Every indirect action required careful consideration. They measured not only the potential outcomes, but also the ethical implications of their guidance. Every life they touched indirectly, every civilization they helped without revealing themselves, was a test of judgment, empathy, and wisdom. Humanity had learned that true power carried responsibility and that decisions could have consequences. Far beyond what could be immediately observed, a defining moment came when an entire sector faced imminent destruction at the hands of an aggressive coalition. Civilians were trapped, supplies were running out, and hope was fading. Humans had the option to intervene directly, yet they chose a different approach. Through indirect guidance, intelligence sharing, and strategic advice, they enabled the civilizations to escape, preserve resources, and survive. The aggressors, confused and frustrated by their inability to predict human actions, began to withdraw. The humans had shaped the outcome decisively, without exposing themselves to danger. This event solidified humanity's reputation as a unique presence in the galaxy. They were not conquerors, nor saviors, nor invaders. They were strategists, observers, and influencers, capable of acting decisively when necessary, but choosing restraint when it served a greater purpose. Other civilizations recognized that humans operated on principles unlike any other: patience, intelligence, and moral calculation. The fear and respect humans earned were unlike anything created by traditional displays of force. As the years passed, humanity's influence continued to grow. Small alliances formed around human guidance. Trade networks thrived under their subtle coordination, and aggressive empires adjusted their strategies to account for human unpredictability. Civilizations that once dismissed humans as inexperienced or weak now watched every movement closely, aware that humans could shape outcomes without ever firing a weapon. Humanity had become a silent but unstoppable force in the galaxy. At the heart of this transformation was humanity's understanding of its own limits. They knew they could not solve every problem, intervene in every conflict, or save every civilization. Instead, they focused on strategic guidance, observation, and preparation. They embraced restraint as a form of power, understanding that choosing when not to act could be just as influential as acting directly. It was a lesson hard learned, but one that defined human strategy and morality. The final realization of this period came when the galaxy itself began to bend subtly under humanity's influence. Civilizations adjusted behavior, alliances shifted, and conflicts were often prevented simply because humans were observing. Aggressive empires thought twice, smaller civilizations sought advice, and the galaxy slowly stabilized in ways humans had orchestrated quietly, invisibly, and deliberately. Their choice to remain silent over immediate action had created a legacy of influence that could endure for generations, in the quiet observation stations scattered across the stars. Humans continued their work. They trained, studied, and analyzed, always preparing for the moment when their full capabilities might need to be revealed. Every decision, every action, and every period of restraint was part of a larger strategy. Humanity had learned to wield patience as power, silence as influence, and knowledge as the most formidable weapon in the galaxy. By the end of this chapter, humanity had become something entirely new. They were no longer merely a young species. Exploring the stars, they were architects of galactic balance, silent strategists who could shape events without immediate action. Civilizations both feared and respected them, not for their fleets or weapons, but for their ability to influence outcomes, preserve life, and command attention through observation and restraint alone. Humanity's journey had shown that true. Power was not measured by aggression or conquest. It was measured by wisdom, patience, and the ability to shape events without revealing one's full hand. Humans had learned that sometimes the most powerful choice was silence, the most strategic action was restraint, and the greatest influence came not from domination, but from careful guidance, observation, and understanding. And so, humanity continued. Across the galaxy, from distant observation stations to hidden fleets and quiet communication networks, humans watched, calculated, and influenced. They had chosen silence over immediate action, patience over impulse, and strategic guidance over reckless intervention. Their presence alone had reshaped the galaxy, and the civilizations that had once dismissed them had learned that humanity was a force unlike any other. In the end, humanity had discovered a truth older than any star, that power is not always loud, that influence is not always visible, and that the choice to remain silent, even in the face of suffering, can command